Hello and welcome to the day 2 of P7 Practice to Pass session being organized by ACCA Pakistan. I am Kashif Kamran, your tutor for the session. Yesterday, on the first day, we were trying to draft a question on audit risk, business risk, and the risk of material misstatement. Now, the agenda for the second day. Okay, so on the day 1 yesterday, we were drafting business risk, audit risk, and risk of material misstatement. The agenda for the second day today is to draft ethical and professional issues. Now in P7, this is a very important area, and in a 100 marks paper, the emphasis of ethical and professional issue is very significant. In the last few attempts of P7, we have seen that the emphasis of ethical and professional issues have increased a lot, and student tends to struggle not with the ethical part, but tends to struggle with the professional part. So I'll be drafting some answers with you today just to guide you that how would you be writing a good answer for ethical and professional issues. Now, let's first build some quick knowledge about the marking scheme and what exactly the examiner asks from you and what exactly you need to answer, and then starting on with the practice session. Now, as like yesterday, the emphasis will remain on three very important things. Firstly, how much to write. Secondly, what to write. And thirdly, how much time to write each question. We did the same thing yesterday because I believe that if a student is unaware of how much to write, you might come down scoring with less marks. Because if you're writing less when a more is required, then technically you might come down scoring less than 50 marks. Secondly, what to write again is something which is given in the case study. I cannot write any generic answer, but I have to write specific answers. And then how much time is to be allocated to each question depends upon the number of marks. I told you that you look at the number of marks and then multiply that by 2 to know how much time you have to write each answer. Okay, let's start off with the second day agenda, which is ethical and professional issues. Now, I was using a Word file yesterday, which I'll keep sharing with you on a daily basis. I didn't share that yesterday, but I'll be sharing the combined file of the day 1 and the day 2 with the attendees at the end of the session today. Okay, now in terms of the second day agenda, where we are discussing the ethical and professional issues, what exactly the examiner asks for when the topic comes in the exam paper. Now, in terms of ethical and professional issues, the very first type one is where the examiner asks you to identify and explain or to discuss the ethical issues and recommend actions. Now that is a very straightforward question, right? Where the examiner is asking you to discuss ethical issues and recommend actions. Now, if a question comes alone on ethical issues, along with actions, which is mostly found in the question number 1. The question 1, which is of 35 marks, has a certain part, either a B part or a C part, and at times the D part, which contains ethical issues. So you may find ethical issues in the first question, which is a mandatory question. And when you are attempting a question which is just on the ethical issues alone, then you have 1 mark per ethical issue. So per ethical issue, you will take 1 mark, and you will take 1 mark per action. Now, if you have 7 marks or if you have 8 marks, then you need to plan your answer accordingly. That if I have 7 marks to gain, if I write 4 ethical issues, I'll gain 4 marks, and I'll write 3 actions, I'll gain 3 marks. That makes me 7. I can do the vice versa. I can say, okay, I'll write 3 ethical issues, but I'll write more actions. You have to achieve your target of 7 marks. Whatever you write more or whatever you write less, but you cannot omit the requirement. You have to do both things, right? The issues and the action. Now, what exactly an ethical issue mean is very important. When you are taking the 1 mark, when you're taking the 1 mark from the ethical issue, so suppose if you find an issue which is a self-review threat, just writing it is a self-review threat will not give you 1 mark. So suppose if I'm writing and I'll say it gave rise to a self-review threat. It gave rise to a self-review threat. A full stop. And I expect I'll get 1 mark for that? No, because the examiner is saying discuss the issue or identify and explain the issue. So how will I get the 1 mark when I say it gives rise to a self-review threat and justify why it gave rise to this threat? Now, once I start the answer with you, I'll tell you how you justify it. But remember that when you're scoring 1 mark, it is not just that you tell examiner this is a self-review threat, but you also should tell the examiner why it is a self-review threat. Okay, just looking at some of the questions, Adam Nasir is putting a question. Is it possible, first question, to be on ethics and professional issues only? No, as per the consistency which the P7 examiner has followed so far, the question 1 only contains ethical issues, never professional issues. So that has been a consistent P7 examiner practice. And Hamraj, yes, you can get the answers of the home assignment questions, provided you do a request of that on my WhatsApp. So once you do the request on my WhatsApp, I'll try sharing the answers of the home assignment questions over the next few days. Don't expect me that I'll do it by tomorrow, but hopefully once the session ends on Friday, I will be in a position to do it. Yes, safeguards and actions are the same thing, Kurutulen. It gave rise to a self-review threat and justify why it gave rise to a threat. So suppose if I write a self-interest threat, I need to justify why a self-interest threat. If I say advocacy threat, I need to justify why advocacy threat. So if I have to take 1 mark, I cannot just identify the threat, but I have to explain why it is a threat, right? So I hope everyone is picking the 1 mark. The 1 mark is identify the issue plus explain why it is an issue. So you will take 1 mark for that. Now, obviously, when you're writing in the actions are more straightforward, because actions for ethics, the actions are the safeguards, because the question is on ethics, right? So if I find an ethical issue, I need to write a safeguard. And for per safeguard, I write per safeguard, I'll take 1 mark. There are many situations that one ethical threat can have multiple safeguards. So if I write 1 threat with 2 safeguards, so 1 threat means 1 mark and 2 safeguard means another 2 marks. So I'm getting down to 3 marks. Suppose the question is on the conflict of interest. Now, if I identify that the issue is the conflict of interest, for the issue, I'll take 1 mark, being a conflict of interest. And then I write the safeguards for conflict of interest, that I should notify the affected parties and I should have separate teams. So I write the 2 safeguards. So it's up to you how you plan your answer. But the only issue is that you cannot just identify and expect the examiner gives you one full mark for that. Secondly, this is the type 1 question, right? We just discussed. So let me emphasize it very clearly. This is the type 1 question, right? So whatever discussion I've done with you so far is for the type 1 question, which is mostly found in the question 1 of the P7 exam, which is only on ethical issues. Now let's do the type 2. The type 2 question which comes on the topic. The type 2 question says identify and explain, or then again ask you discuss, or then might ask you to evaluate any of the verbs, the ethical and professional issues, and recommend actions. Now, this is a type 2 question, right, which is very popular in P7 exams, and a question where students have a lot of fear factor attempting a question like such in P7. Identify and explain or discuss or evaluate any of those verbs, the ethical and professional issue. Now, see, the examiner is asking two things from you. Not just the ethical issues, the examiner is also asking you to write the professional issues and obviously the actions. Now, you know action carries 1 mark. But when ethics comes along with professional issue, when ethics comes along professional issues, then the marking scheme will change. Then marking scheme will change. You will have 1.5 marks per ethical issue, and you will have 1.5 marks per professional issue. So when the question is alone on ethics, then the ethical issue is 1 mark, right? But when the question is on ethical and professional issue, the same ethical issue is now 1.5 mark. So if a question is alone ethics and I'm finding a self-review threat, then I'll take 1 mark. But if in a question on ethical and professional issue, I'm finding the ethical threat like self-review, I'll take 1.5 mark. Right? Secondly, 1 mark is for the action. So the marking scheme for action has not changed. It has remained the same. So please be very clear with the marking scheme, because again, you will come down to the same phenomena, writing less when more is required or writing more and when less is required. So I hope you're understanding the type 2 question, which has ethical and professional together. So you have 1.5 mark per ethical issue, 1.5 mark per professional issue, and 1 mark per action. Now, what exactly is professional issue and how you write them and how you identify them, let's wait for that once I start the practice session. Okay, the third thing. If a question type 3, which is the maximum now, type 3, the last question, when it says identify and explain / discuss / evaluate the ethical, professional and quality control issues and recommend actions. See, the examiner has added the third thing now. Evaluate the ethical, professional, and the quality control issues. So this time, the examiner has brought the maximum. Now that is the maximum for P7 question. You cannot get the type 4. There are only 3 types of questions which exist as per the consistency being followed by the examiner. So now you know the ethical issues, right? The ethical issues will give you marks which are, now because this is again a combined question where ethics is with professional and ethics is with quality control issue. So again, the marking scheme will be from the type 2. Now, when ethics comes along professional and quality control, then you have 1.5 marks per ethical issue. You have 1.5 marks per professional issue. And you have 1.5 marks per quality control issue. And again, 1 mark per action. So it's only the type 1, right, where you get ethics and you have 1 mark for ethics and 1 mark for action. But in the type 2 and type 3, the marking scheme is 1.5 mark for an issue, whatever the issue is, whether it is ethical, professional, or quality control, and you have 1 mark for action. So these are the 3 types of questions, right, which exist in the past paper, and you should know the marking scheme for each type to write exactly what is to be written. So is that marking scheme clear to everyone? Just before I start with the practice session, let me see some of the questions which the attendees are asking. Yes, for when the examiner asks us to evaluate something, we need to write a conclusion, right? That's very consistent across P7. So whenever the examiner says evaluate something, you have to write a conclusion at the end of the answer. Yes, exactly. The word file I am making, during the session, I'll be sharing that on the WhatsApp group. If not on the daily basis, at least once the session comes to an end. Yes, we need to write a conclusion, right? Clark, I think I've answered your question. No. There is no separate marks for conclusion. There is no separate marks for conclusion, but that is the requirement of the verb. That is a requirement of the verb that you have to give in a conclusion. Is that clear, Kurutulen? Yes, mostly, Namra. The type 2 and the type 3 questions mostly comes in section B, but in recent past, the type 2 and type 3 has also come in the question number 2. The question number 2 as well, right? So don't take a risk. This type 1 normally comes in the first question, but the type 2 question can be in question 2, can be in section A, question 2, or it can be in section B. Now, if it goes to section B, then you have a choice. But if it is in section A, question 2, then you have no choice. And the same happens with the type 3. In terms of the type 3, the same phenomena. The type 3 can be in question 2 of the section A, and it can be in section B. Right? Namra, is that clear with how this type 2 and 3 can be in the paper? Okay, so let's now start with looking at a proper question and see, have we understood the marking schemes and can we write in a proper answer? Because once I start writing the answer, I'll try making the do's and don'ts very clear. What we should do and what we should not, and how we maximize the number of marks, the opportunity to maximize the marks. Okay, now the questions you have for day 2. If we start with the day 2 first question, which is from the December 13 exams, question number 4, which you will have in your handout section of the webinar, and you can see it on the screen as well. Now, if I go down this question, which is the question 4 of the December 13 exams, and I'll see the requirement of this question. It says, identify and discuss the ethical and professional issues. Right, so this question is asking me identify and discuss the ethical and professional issues. So when the question asking ethical and professional issue, I know that for every ethical issue, I'll take 1.5 mark. And for every professional issue, I'll take 1.5 mark. And then the examiner is saying, recommend actions, 1 mark per action. So if I know the marking scheme, I can plan the answer accordingly, and I'll not be writing extra, which will save me time, and I can complete my 4 questions in 3 hours, which itself is a very big challenge in P7. Because I personally have seen students writing a lot in P7 when that should not be the case. So ethical and professional issues, right? So every ethical and professional issue will give me 1.5 marks, and every action will give me 1 mark, right? Now there are 3 situations: Tedbury Company, Stratford Company, and Benbury Company. And under the 3, I need to work on the ethical and professional issues. Now I just want to illustrate an example with you to demonstrate how to present an answer. Though my answers are given and is being uploaded as the documents for the today's webinar, you can see them at your free time. But I want to do an exercise with you just to portray how to do it, because if I'm writing, that will give you a very good feel of how to go about it. And if I just start reading it, you will not be taking much interest into it. If you look at the Benbury, the last equation, it says Benbury is a listed company and its audit committee has asked Chester to perform an actuarial valuation on the company's defined benefit pension plan. Now, the audit committee has asked the firm, can you provide the actuarial valuation service? Now, obviously, if the firm have necessary skills, then the firm can perform the actuarial valuation service. But if the firm does not have necessary skills, then the firm cannot perform the actuarial valuation service. Now the examiner says one of the partner is a qualified actuary. Now that means we have the skills. So we have the skills to perform the actuarial valuation service and has the necessary skills and expertise to perform the service. So the request which has come from the audit committee is an opportunity for the audit firm, and they have skills to do so, right? And if you have a qualified actuary, then automatically means if you perform the actuarial valuation service, you will be providing a quality service. Because if I have skills, I deliver, I perform something with quality. If I don't have skills, then obviously the quality will be compromised. Okay, Benbury has a year ending 28th of Feb, and the audit planning is due to commence next week. Its financial statement for the year ending 28th of Feb, in respect of which the audit report was unmodified. We are the auditor of this company as well, right? Benbury. And Benbury has asked us to perform an actuarial valuation. The total assets of the company is 35 million, and the pension liability of the company is 105,000. Now, I hope you know this, being a P7 student, that whenever the examiner gives you a total asset, the examiner wants you to identify the materiality of what? The materiality of the pension liability, because we have to perform an actuarial valuation of the defined benefit pension plan. So you need to identify how significant the pension liability is towards the total assets. Saima, exactly. That will come in the safeguard part. Can we provide the service or not is something to be decided when I write the action. But currently, the service is very attractive. We have skills for the services. But the second thing is, can I offer the service or not? That is something to be addressed in terms of writing the actions. No, Kuratal. That is exactly what I will do now, because the question you are raising is a very important question, and that is mostly a blunder the student do in the exam paper. Okay, now if everyone has read the Benbury company and you have the case in mind, the examiner is asking ethical and professional issues, right? And with ethical and professional issues, the examiner wants us to write the actions Now, knowing the marking scheme and knowing the case, if I go back to the Word file and I have 6 marks to take, see, I'll do it with you, even though that's given in my answer, because I want to demonstrate it, how to write it. And that will give you a real good feeling of writing an answer. Okay, so the question I'm doing is December 13, right? The question number 4, and I'm doing the part C as a in-session drafting. And this in-session drafting would help you. We're doing a question on Benbury, and examiner has given us 6 marks. And the examiner has asked me to identify and explain ethical and professional issues and recommend actions. Now, in an exam, if I just spend 2 minutes in planning, the 2 minutes of planning could be worthwhile for me. Yes, exactly, Waleed. That's perfect knowledge. I'll be coming to that once I write the actions. Muhammad Nabil, I'll just justify how materiality will come in ethical answer. Okay, let's illustrate. Now, once I know I have 6 marks, 1.5 mark per issue, see how would I start writing. My heading is Benbury, right? And under Benbury, I'm starting to write an answer. Okay, let me put this question on top, otherwise you'll get confused with exactly what I'm trying to say. The question is to identify and explain the ethical issues. Under that is the heading Benbury. Under the Benbury heading, I'll start writing the answer. I cannot write the answer this way. This is a question raised by Kurutulan. I put a heading ethical issues. I put the heading professional issues. And I put the heading actions. I cannot write answer this way because I am not classifying the issue. Rather, I'm telling examiner the issue and explaining it. This is a very immature approach that you classify the issue, because in the exam hall, half the time you will be confused whether it is professional or whether it is ethical. It's better to write it and score your marks. You are not classifying the problem. You are telling what is the problem and why it is a problem. So, Kurutulen, your question was simply this, right? That should I write the answer under the 3 headings? No. So, have I addressed your question? Okay. The other questions from Waleed, Clark, and the other questions from Saima, I'll try to address that once I start writing the rest of the answer. Okay, so this is the wrong way, right, of answering the question. So let me put this off. So I'm not answering the question under the 3 headings at all. Rather, I'll be answering question under Benbury. Now, when I'm answering the question under Benbury, I'll stick to the order of the case. So the very first thing was that the audit committee has requested to perform an actuarial valuation service. So see how I start writing an answer. The request by the audit committee of the Benbury company to perform actuarial valuation services The request by the audit committee of Benbury Company to perform actuarial valuation services should be considered carefully by Chester and Company in terms should be carefully considered by Chester Company. Chester does have necessary skills to provide the actuarial valuation service, and if the qualified partner, if the qualified Chester does have necessary skills to provide the actuarial valuation service, and the service can be offered with best quality if the partner who is a qualified actuary leads the engagement. See, this is something positive, that the request which has come from the Benberry company to perform the actuarial valuation service should be considered carefully by Chester. Firstly, the Chester should consider it in terms of the skills. Chester does have necessary skills to provide the actuarial valuation service, and the service can be offered with best quality if the partner who is a qualified actuary leads the engagement. So if something is positive, appreciate that. If something is positive, appreciate that. And this is a very important issue here, because a lot of time, even if there is something positive in the case, the student thinks, no, I just need to criticize it. This was something favorable, right, for the Chester company, that the Chester company did had the skills to perform the service, even though we are not sure can we offer the service or not till the time we come to the action part. But before we come to the action part, at least we have the skills, right, to perform the actuarial valuation service. So how much marks will I take from here? 1.5 marks, because I justified we had skills to have a better quality. Then I change my paragraph and I come to the second paragraph and I say, if the actuarial valuation service is performed by Chester, it will give rise to self-review threat and self-interest threat. Now I have to justify why. If the actuarial valuation service is performed by Chester, it will give rise to a self-review threat and a self-interest threat. The actuarial valuation will become part or component of the financial statements, which will later be reviewed by the same firm. We are the auditor of this company, right? And if we perform the actuarial valuation service, so next year when the firm will come for the audit, they will have a self-review threat, knowing that the actuarial valuation has been done by the same firm. I normally tell my students that the self-review has to do something with future, because I do a service in the present and the self-review comes later. So if I offer a service now, the next year when I come for the audit, it will become a self-review threat. Full stop. Moreover, because I'm the auditor of this company, moreover, the income generated by offering the actuarial valuation service, because I'm the auditor, I'm getting the audit fees, and now will I get the actuarial valuation fees. So moreover, the income generated by offering the actuarial valuation service will result in self-interest threat. See, I justified both the threats. Why actuarial valuation service will become a self-review threat? Because it will be reviewed by the same firm the next year. And the income generated by offering the actuarial valuation service would result in the self-interest threat. Now, I wrote two threats. So I'm taking 1.5 marks plus 1.5 marks. I got 3 marks from this paragraph. The questions, right? The questions which are coming to me on the drafting I'm currently doing, just wait for 5 minutes. I'll be responding to your queries because currently I'm just concentrating on the drafting part and discussing the drafting with you. So I'll be responding to your queries in like 5 minutes. Just hold your questions for 5 minutes so that you can concentrate what I'm trying to tell you, and I will be in a better position to answer your queries. Okay, then I change the para. Can I perform the service? Yes, I can because I have the skills. Second, if I perform the service, there might be some ethical dilemmas. One of the ethical dilemma could be the self-review threat, and another ethical dilemma could be the self-interest threat. Now, having written that, I'm standing at 4.5 marks. I need to take 6 marks. If I write one more issue, I take my 6 marks. So next paragraph is bringing me to a point where I can wrap up my answer. Now, lastly, the examiner was telling me the total assets is 35 million and the pension liability is $105,000. If a company is listed, Benbury is a listed company. Any service which is material cannot be offered. And that is the reason the examiner was giving me the total assets and the pension liability. There was an attendee who asked me, what is the sense of materiality in ethics? Because the sense of materiality in ethics is that how would you judge whether it is material or immaterial? Listed company. The code of conduct says if the service is material, then it is prohibited to a listed company. And if the service is immaterial to the financial statement, then it is allowed to the listed company. So why was the examiner giving us the number? The examiner was giving us a number because it was a listed company and he wants you to judge whether the firm can offer the actuarial valuation or not. How would I judge it? The pension liability of $105,000 is, can anyone find out the percentage? How much is the percentage divided that by $35 million? Can anyone give me the quick answer? Okay, 0.3%. Waleed. The pension liability of $105,000 is 0.3% of the total assets, thus immaterial to the financial statements. So Benbury is a listed company, right? And the pension liability is immaterial to the total assets. So now I get a justification that can I offer this service? Yes, I can because it's immaterial. Had it been material, I could not have offered it. So the pension liability of $105,000 is 0.3% of the total asset, thus immaterial to the financial statement. Examiner will give you a mark for this if in a question on ethics, there are numbers given and you use those numbers to justify whether the service is material or immaterial, to show that one sentence and to show the calculation of 0.3, the examiner will reward you 1 mark to determine and comment on materiality. So the examiner will say, if you determine the materiality, which Waleed has done 0.3%, so 0.3% is determine, and the comment is thus immaterial to the financial statement, So 1 mark, bonus mark. It could be a life saver mark in P7, a difference between 49 and 50. How many times student ignores determining the materiality in P7? These are so beneficial marks in P7 that you determine and comment on the materiality. Because you are a manager in the paper and you have to demonstrate this skill of higher marks. So the pension liability, right, is immaterial, 1 mark for that. So I'm standing at 5.5 marks now. The pension liability, thus immaterial to the financial statement. Therefore, Chester can provide actuarial valuation services to Benbury Company with by having a separate team for the valuation engagement. You can provide the service, but you should have safeguard, right? Is it permissible? Yes, it's permissible because it's immaterial. So therefore, Chester can provide actuarial valuation service to Benbury Company by having a separate team for valuation engagement. The separate team would also mitigate the self-review threat, which is the major threat. So I wrote the action, 1 mark for action. Now see, where am I standing? If I tabulate my marks, I'm standing at 6.5 marks. See the way of answering question. Did I use the heading? I just used one heading, which was Benbury. But the second thing I did good was, for every issue, I changed the paragraph. In one paragraph, I wrote the skills. In the second paragraph, I wrote the ethical problems. And then in the next paragraph, I wrote in the action. Are you getting some sense of the drafting I demonstrated for you? Has this been beneficial for you, the drafting? Are you getting some sense of this? Particularly those students who are confused between drafting under two headings, ethical and professional? Yes, Vakas, it's up to you how many actions you want to write. But if I go top down, the only definite action here was, can I offer the service or not? So the one definite action here was, the service can be offered. It's up to you how many actions you write. But the point of concern was that why I drafted this answer was to clarify the way of presenting the answer. Is everyone getting clarity on the presenting the answer? Yes, Farooq, I just justified that. For a listed company, if something is immaterial, that's allowed. And if it is immaterial, then that's prohibited. So we found the percentage, 0.3. So it's permissible, right? We can offer both services. No, Kamal, again, I'm repeating the statement for the third time now, that if it is a listed company and it is material, I cannot offer the service. So why are you raising a question like such? If your question was, if the amount was material, was it possible to provide service? Obviously, no. So it all depends upon materiality, right? It all depends upon materiality. If it is material, then it's prohibited. So on prohibited, we cannot have an argument. But if it is immaterial, then it is permissible. If it is permissible, I can have a separate team. Is that clear, Kamal Hussain? Okay, that's good. That's good. No, Joe Kong, don't include the ACCA code when you're writing the answer. Don't refer to them. See, I wrote the answer. I didn't refer to the code of conduct here. Yes, Vakas, that is simply knowledge. That is simply knowledge. All material services technically are prohibited to listed companies. So I just need a quick answer from your side. The purpose of drafting this answer, have you got the objective delivered? The purpose was just to guide you, facilitate you, that this is the way of presenting an answer on ethical and professional issue. Did I wrote anywhere in my answer this is a professional issue? See, a student can do this way. Let me do the don'ts. See, I'm redrafting. I'm using the red font now. And for the red font, I'll be criticizing the student. Okay, see the blunders. The request by the audit committee of Benbury Company to perform an actuarial valuation service should be considered carefully by Chester. Chester does have necessary skills to provide the actuarial valuation service, and the service can be offered with the best quality with a partner who is a qualified actuary. Full stop. And a student writes this. Let me use the red color. This is a professional issue. Then in the next paragraph, self-interest threat, full stop, and he says, these are ethical issues. No, not at all. Examiner knows that skill is a professional issue. He don't want you to identify that a skill is a professional issue. You justify that the skill will boost the quality. That is exactly what the examiner need. He does not need that after the full stop you write this is a professional issue. So please, no classifications, no classifications at all. Let me strike through this. Whatever I am writing in red is wrong, right? Whatever I'm writing in red is wrong. That is just to criticize you being students. Is that clear to everyone? Uh, Obviously, professional issues are very spontaneous in the questions. You do not need to spot them. When you're reading a question which has ethical and professional issues, minus the ethical issue, whatever is left in the case is professional. So if I'm reading a case which has ethical and professional issues, I can minus the ethical issues from the case. Whatever is left is a professional issue. Right? Okay, let me do one more thing. Suppose I am doing a question which is on ethical and professional issue, right? There is a question where I have to identify and explain the ethical and professional issues, right? And there is a case, right, which I'm reading in the exam paper. Now, I read the case and suppose I have 6 marks. And even the examiner is asking to recommend actions. Now, if I have 6 marks and the examiner is saying identify and explain the ethical and professional issues and recommend actions, not Benbury, right? I'm just creating an illusion. I read the case, and in the case, I found 3 ethical problems. Technically, would give me 1.5 multiplied by 3 is equal to 4.5 marks. So I would be very relaxed in the exam hall that I need to take 6 marks, and in a question I had 3 ethical problems, because students are good on ethics. So whenever they start finding ethics, they get a comfort level. And if I found 3 ethical issues in a case, technically that will give me 4.5 marks. And then if I write 2 actions of the 3 issues, of any of the 3 issues, I'll take another 2 marks. So technically, I have achieved my target. See, I didn't wrote any professional issue. It's not when the examiner says ethical and professional issue, you have to find both from the case. Even if you think that on the basis of the ethical issue, you have accomplished your marks, that's good. So examiner would not penalize you for that you didn't identify a professional issue and he will penalize you for that. No, because you made your marks. Examiner is not putting a cap, right? Examiner is not saying 3 marks for ethical issues and 3 marks for professional issue. Examiner is not writing a note. Examiner is not writing a note that marks are equally divided. There is no cap. There is no restriction. So when there is no restriction, you're open. So if I found 3 ethical problems, I take 4.5 marks. I write 2 actions, I take my 6 marks. I'm not worried about professional issues. But the vice versa can be very, very stressful for you in exam paper. See the second equation. Let me write with a different color so I can illustrate. This is a different equation. I read the case, and in the case, I only found 1 ethical issue. That means 1.5 marks. and obviously one action to support the ethical problem, one action to support the ethical problem is equal to another 1 mark. Now I'm taking my score up to 2.5 marks out of 6. Now I am in a stress situation. Knowing that the examiner wants me to identify the ethical and professional issues, and reading the whole case, I only found one ethical issue, and there is no other ethical issue in the case. Sorry for that. There is no ethical issue in the case. Now, that means I cannot find any other ethical issue because there is no other ethical issue in the case. Now you're standing at 2.5 marks. You still need to take 3.5 marks more to get to 6. Now that means the rest of the case is on professional issue. So I am left with 3.5 marks and I'm confused in the exam hall. How can I take them? The question is on ethical and professional issue. And that means now the rest of the case is on professional issues, which I need to identify to score my remaining marks. Equation 1 was very good because even though we have to work on both, I found ethical issues I didn't work on professional issue, and I was very secured. But in the equation 2, I was reading the same question, but I just found one ethical problem and one action, and now you will come in the stress situation. And you will say, from where will I take the 3.5 marks? So normally, when you're reading a question on ethical and professional issue, because you're good on ethics, find it first, see how much marks you got, then you can attack on the professional side. If ethics makes your mark, if ethics makes your complete marks, you're not worried about professional. But if ethics fails to make your complete marks, then you're worried about professional. I hope this illustration is giving you some sense, and I hope I have justified my point with clarity. Okay, let me see some questions coming from attendees. Yes, we're just taking the namaz break in 5 minutes. Just in 5 minutes, we're taking the namaz break. Secondly, there is a question coming from Hemraj. Let me read that. That's a very long question from Hemraj. If we are to mention that when the auditor will perform audit procedures on defined benefit pension plan may cause the auditor not to critically assess the evidence on pension plan because it may undermine the actuarial services provided by the Chester company, would that be okay? Yes, perfect, Hemraj. That is even the right way of writing the self-review. But you can have multiple options. And if so, should we show it as a self-interest threat or a self-review thread? No, we'll show it as your explanation, Hemraj, is self-review, not self-interest. Self-interest is income generated. Self-interest is income generated. Okay, so is my illustration, which I tried making with you, is giving you some sense? I'll do many such illustrations today just to make a mindset clear, because honestly, students are so good on ethics that they can find it very easily. And if your marks accumulate on ethics, you are very free to go with it. But what if your marks does not accumulate with ethics? Then that means you have to find professional, and that will increase your stress level in the exam hall. Okay, I hope within the limitation of the practice to pass session, and within the limitation that I just need to practice with you, I cannot give you the lecture behind the topic. I hope within that limitation, this equation is putting a perfect picture for all of you. Okay, we're taking the namaz break, the Maghrib prayers in Pakistan. So just a 10 minutes break, a 10-minute break for namaz, and we'll resume at approximately 7:05 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time. Okay, welcome back post namaz break. So we were discussing the equations in terms of if a 6 marks questions come, which has ethical and professional issues. So we found two equations, right? In one equation where you find ethics and your stress level goes down and you make up your 6 marks. In the second equation, when ethics was very less and your stress level goes up to make up your 6 marks. Now, the third equation. Suppose, let me put another font color. Okay, suppose you're reading a question. I read the case, and in the case, I found 4 ethical issues, right? 4 ethical issues. That means 4 multiplied by 1.5 is equal to 6 marks. I have achieved my target. I have achieved my target, right? I'm not writing any action. I'm not writing any professional issue. I've still got my 6 marks. I normally guide this that you have a target of 6 marks, right? In the illustration I am discussing with you. To get to 6 marks, there are many ways. Whichever way you adopt, you have to get to 6 marks. I have discussed so many ways with you. I read the case, and in the case I found 4 ethical issues. I taking 6 marks. I no action, no professional issues, and I'm still getting my 6 marks. Please remember, let me emphasize that. Please remember that there is no cap of marks. There is no cap of marks. That means examiner is not saying that you have equal number of marks. There is nothing like such, right? Examiner is not putting a note that you have equal number of marks. That means if I get a 6 marks question which has ethical, professional, and actions, and the examiner puts a note, the marks are equally divided. Now I'll say the marks are equally divided. That means I have 2 marks for ethical issues, 2 marks for professional issues, and 2 marks for action. But examiner is not putting a note like such. That means there is no cap. Yes, if you achieve your marks, then actions are not necessary. So it's up to you, right? How you achieve your 6 marks. You achieve your 6 marks writing action. You achieve your 6 marks by not writing action. It's up to you how you achieve your 6 marks. So if I want to reach a place, there might be many routes. There might be many routes reaching the place. I might take the route A. I might take the route B. I might take the route C. And I'll find the easiest way of reaching my destination. So what's my destination? My destination is 6 marks. So in the exam, will I find the easiest way of achieving my destination, or will I find the difficult way of achieving my destination? When the examiner is giving me the liberty, and when the examiner is giving me the freedom that choose any route and get to your destination. So I hope I have a clarity on my statement here, and it is a very emphasizable statement. So is that clear to everyone that you have a destination in front of you, right? 6 marks, choose any route and get to your destination. And it's very illogical that if you choose the difficult route to get to your destination. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, one more thing. We were discussing this question, right? Where I tried making an allusion. Suppose I come back to my question, this one, which I was making for the purpose of illustration. I highlighted that in yellow. Suppose the examiner gives you a question, identify and explain the ethical and professional issues and recommend actions, And under that, the examiner puts a note. At times, you must have seen the past papers, the examiner puts a note, and in the note, the examiner tells something. Suppose the examiner puts a note here, and in the note, the examiner says, marks are equally divided between each part, between each requirement. Now, if a question like such comes in, then that means if the marks are equally divided between each requirement, then there are 2 marks for ethical requirement, 2 marks for professional requirement, and 2 marks for action. So now the examiner has put a cap, but this is just a thought process. Examiner has never given a question like such. Let's cross it. So if the examiner is not putting me in a cap, so do I have a liberty to do the way I want to do it? Examiner would not penalize me for that, right? Examiner would not penalize me for that. So let me put one last sentence, emphasizable sentence. If a question is on the issue and action, even though if you write all issues, you can take up your 6 marks. If you're not writing any action, right? But examiner would not penalize you for that even. Examiner would not penalize you for that even. But to be more professional, if I have an issue and an action, I'll spare some marks. I'll spare some marks for actions, and I'll spare some marks for issues. So in a 6 marks question, I'll think, okay, 4 marks for issues and 2 marks for action. That puts a better way of answering question. But even if you write all marks for issues, and you don't write any action in the panic of an exam, examiner will not penalize you for that practice. So there is no cap, right? Is that cap perspective clear to everyone? Will that make your life easier in a question on ethical and professional issues? Okay, let's go down with another question. There is another question, session 2 question, because there is something to learn from this. If you look at this question 2 you have for session today, which says June 2013, question number 2A. June 2013, question number 2A. Now in this question, the examiner is giving me 13 marks, right? Yes, Clark, I'm saying, so you can ignore equal, right? Because the examiner is not saying equal, so you can ignore equal. Yes, exactly. Don't be in the worryingness of equal, because the examiner is not asking us equal. So do at your freedom. Do at your freedom what you want to do. I hope, Clark, that's clear to your question requirement. Okay, now this question has 13 marks. We are doing a June 13 question number 2A. In this question, the examiner is saying, in relation to the audit of the retriever group, evaluate. Now, wherever the examiner used the word evaluate, I have to give a conclusion at the end of the answer. So the basic reason of picking this question was to discuss that with you. What the examiner wants us to evaluate? Yes, but that is not the case, Clark. That's not the case with the question on ethical and professional issues. Marks are equally divided. That note normally comes in a question on evidence, or that note normally comes in elsewhere in P7, but never in an ethical and professional issue. The examiner says marks are equally divided. So don't be worried about that. But if such comes in, then you have to divide them equally. But that's never been the case, right, in the past paper. Now, what the examiner wants us to evaluate, the examiner wants us to evaluate the quality control issues, the ethical issues, and the professional issues. in respect of planning and performing the group audit. Now, ethics, we know. Examiner has added two things here, professional and quality control. The marking scheme would remain 1.5 mark, right? 1.5 mark for a quality control issue, 1.5 mark for ethical issue, 1.5 mark for professional issue. And I have to evaluate them. I have 13 marks. So before I read the case with you, and tell you one thing, how to do it, let me prepare it. If I'm preparing my answer for this question and I want to demonstrate this answer for you, retriever, again, my answers are with you in the form of handouts. You can read my answers, but I'm demonstrating them just to give you a better feel that how to go about it. Retriever group, question 2, June 2013 exams, and we're doing the part A. The question says, evaluate means to give a conclusion at the end of the answer, right? What we have to evaluate, number 1, quality control, ethical, and professional issues, right? And each of them carry 1.5 marks. Now I have 13 marks, right? So if I divide 13 with 1.5, what will I be getting? Technically, nine issues, irrespective of their classification. So one student write one, yes, exactly, Kamal. This relates to practice management in terms of syllabus. Yes, quality control is part of professional issues. Okay, so 9 issues, right? 9 issues. Now I can write more ethical issues, I can write less ethical issues, I can write more quality control issues, I can write less quality control issues. But what is my target? My target is to write 9 issues. Now, how to write 9 issues? Let's do the exercise I just did with you. In an exam paper, when you get a question on ethical, professional, and quality control issue, right? And the good thing where you are strong is ethics. Let's see, in this question, how many marks is on ethics? Let's see how much stress can go down. Let's find ethics from the question. Let's see how much marks can ethics gives me. How much marks can ethics give to me in this 13 marks question? Because then what is left would be quality control and professional issues. Let's see how much could be the stress reliever. So let's do this exercise. I'm reading the case. We'll just find where is ethics in the case, right? And see out of the 13 marks, how many marks comes on ethics. Right, obviously there is no cap, right? We are free to write which issue we want to write. But I just did an exercise with you, right? That from a case, my first thing where I'm strong at is to find ethics, to see how many marks can I pick. Okay, can you do one thing? I'm giving you 5 minutes. There are 4 paragraphs in front of your screen. The paragraph starting with the audit has been time pressured and the case ending with for which she was very grateful. Can you read these 4 paragraphs and just tell me how many ethical issues have you found? Because every ethical issue will give you 1.5 mark. And then whatever is remaining will be the quality control and professional issues. Just spend 5 minutes. I want to see how you react, how many ethical issues you found from the 4 paragraphs. Your time has started. 5 minutes. Respond quickly. Yes, the handout section has the same documents which has been emailed to you previously. Okay, let's come down with the final answer. The only good answer I've got so far from the attendees is one good answer from Amina Usman. She thinks there are 2 ethical issues and 2 is the right answer. Then from Sarah, she picked the first ethical issue right, self-review, but you failed to pick the second ethical issue wrong. There are 2 ethical issues. There are 2 ethical issues. Not intimidation, Jokong. The time pressure audit was due to my fault. The management didn't put me under time pressure. I must have done a bad planning because the question is not saying the management put me under time pressure. I came into time pressure because I badly planned the audit. Because the junior was doing most of the audit, so we have to come under time pressure. It was not a time pressure from the management or the management imposed a time pressure on me. If the management would have imposed a time pressure on me, then it would have been an intimidation threat. But currently, I am coming under a time pressure just because of my own fault, because I have involved the junior so much in the conduct of the audit. So there are two ethical issues, right? If I just identify them for you, in the para 3, I did the calculation. It's a self-review threat for the deferred tax. Deferred tax is a component of the financial statement and we are the auditor. So if I do the calculation, I'll not be criticizing my own calculation. And then in the last paragraph, the financial controller asked for my advice. Advice is an advocacy threat on how the tax losses could be utilized by the group in future. Now, when you are advising means to promote the business interest. The business interest here is how the tax losses can be utilized. How the tax losses can be utilized. So if I tell business how the tax losses can be utilized, I'm promoting the interest of the business. That is an advocacy threat. So there are two ethical issues in this case, right? So let's go back to my Word file. I have target of 9 And in this question, I found one being self-review. Self-review was basically the calculation of the deferred tax. The calculation of the deferred tax. That will give me 1.5 marks if I write it properly. Then I had an advocacy threat. The advocacy threat was basically because of the advice given on tax losses. That is promoting the business interest, promoting the client business interest, right? So another 1.5 marks for that. So technically from ethics, I'm taking my 3 marks. Now that means in the whole question, 3 marks are there, 13 marks are there, and 13 marks. No, junior reviewing each other work is a professional issue, is a quality control issue rather, because if the junior review the work of the junior, he will fail to identify mistakes in the work, which will compromise the quality of the work. So junior reviewing each other work. Don't get distracted with the word review. Review means the junior is checking the work of the other junior. So if the junior is checking the work of another junior, it is a professional issue because the quality will be compromised. There might be errors in the work which will not be identified. No, Himraj, no, time pressure cannot be self-interest. Time pressure is a quality control problem because when we are in a time pressure, we are in a rush. When we are in a rush, we compromise our quality. You cannot forcefully identify ethical problems. That is another mistake, and that is another issue which the student do, and you most of the attendees are doing here as well. You cannot forcefully identify the ethical problem. When the ethical problem is there in the case, it is there, and it is very obviously there. You cannot take your illogical assumptions and convert everything into ethics, which most of the attendees are doing currently. So they're just taking wild assumptions, and through wild assumptions, they're just converting anything into ethics. You cannot do that. When ethics is there, it is there. There were two very obvious points. Calculation of the deferred tax was a very obvious ethical problem, and advice on the tax losses was a very obvious ethical problem. Rest all is professional and quality control. So please don't take your wild assumptions converting everything into ethics because you are strong on ethics. So that means you can convert everything into ethics. That's not the case, right? That's not the case that you convert everything into ethics just by taking wild assumptions around the subject matter. Is that clear, attendees? In my statement, I've tried addressing many of these concerns coming from attendees. Sumaya Hassan, you're perfectly right. Self-review advocacy. Namra Mukhtar, you're perfectly right. Yes, the maximum answer relates with quality. That's good, sir, for us. No, the advice cannot be a self-review threat. Initially, it is an advice. Initially, it is an advice. Advice can later become a self-review threat because if the tax losses are utilized, they will become part of the financial statement later. But currently, we are providing them an advice. So advice is a very picking word to generate an advocacy. Advocacy can later become a self-review. Advocacy can later become a self-review, right? But at the present, it is an advice, right? So now that means I have left with how many marks? I am left with 10 marks. That is 13 minus 3. So my target is now professional slash quality control issues. And how many issues I have to find? 10 divided by 1.5. So that technically means 7 issues. Okay, now because you have read the case, so let's find the issues and I'll discuss them with you. The first issue you found was 7. It was a time pressure audit. Time pressured audit, right? How would you justify that? See, Namra and rest of the other attendees, I think one and two more attendees, right? Just Namra is putting this question. Rest, I think, is all clear. Uh, Kamal Hussain uh, is also putting the same question. See, when I'm writing the answer under the heading of a time pressured audit, am I writing the answer this way? Time pressure is a quality control issue. Will I start writing the answer this way? No. Or will I start writing the answer this way? Time pressure is a professional issue? No. How will I start writing the answer? Time pressure audit means that I was in a rush. See how I'm writing the answer. I'll say because the audit was time pressured, it must had been done without proper planning or a timetable, which brought the audit under time constraints. Because if see the question says evaluate the quality control, ethical and professional issues in planning and performing the group audit. Because the audit was time pressured, it must had been done without proper planning or a timetable, which brought the audit under the time constraint and which could have compromised the quality of the audit, or else could have increased the detection risk. Because we have done audit under a time pressure. So time pressure means I must have done audit in a bit of rush, haste, because I had a burden of time, which could have compromised the quality of the audit or else could have increased the detection risk. So I am not worried about the class of the issue. I'm just worried about what's the implication of the issue. If the audit was time pressured, I'm just concerned about the implication of it. I'm not concerned about is it a professional issue, is it an ethical issue, and in the exam hall, half an hour is wasted. Should I write it as an ethical issue? No. Should I write it as a professional issue? No. Should I write it as a quality control issue? I cannot do that. Just one more example. If I go back to the question which says, two of the juniors, the audit manager told the junior not to perform some of the planned procedures. Now, see, the manager is giving a wrong instruction. So what should I be writing? In my point number 2, the manager give a wrong instruction to the junior, the manager give a wrong instruction to the junior, asking him to deviate from the planned procedures, which demonstrates an inappropriate professional behavior on part of the manager. The manager is custodian of the leadership for the audit team, and if the manager guides junior wrongly, it will set a wrong culture and precedence. That's one way. The second way is manager give a wrong instruction asking the junior to from deviate from planned procedures, which must have compromised work on share capital and director emoluments. Rather, no work must had been performed. No work must had been performed on director emoluments and share capital. Any one of them. See, the manager told the junior not to do anything on the share capital and director emoluments. Firstly, the manager has given a wrong instruction because you cannot deviate from the planning. And secondly, that means the junior must have done nothing on the share capital and the director emolument. So no evidence was gathered. I'm not worried about whether gathering evidence is a professional issue or is a quality control issue. I'm more worried about the problem. The problem is no evidence was gathered. Yes, you can write the ethical part first, secure your marks, and then get down with writing the other parts of the case. Right? So I'm not worried about the class of the issue. Class of the issue is not something you should be worried about. It's more about the issue and its implication on the audit. So if the manager told the junior not to perform the planned procedure, what is the implication? The implication is that the junior must not have gathered any evidence on the share capital and director emolument. I'll not tell examiner after the full stop, this is a professional issue. No sense of that. You're not doing an F8 exam where you need to classify the problems. You're doing a P7 exam where you need to put the implication of the problem. You are a manager in the case, right? So being a manager, you just need to tell the implication of the problem given in the exam paper. You cannot write the answer as if the junior is writing the answer, classifying the problem, make 3 columns, 1 column for ethics, 1 column for professional, 1 column for quality. We cannot make a table, right? We cannot classify the problems. Because if that is the case, half the time will be wasted on putting, should I put the time pressure in the column 1? Should I put the time pressure in the column 2? Should I put the time pressure in the column 3? No. Just another example. He also instructed us not to use the firm statistical sampling method in selecting the trade receivable balance, as it would be quicker to pick the sample based upon our own judgment. Whose judgment? The junior judgment. Junior cannot exercise a good judgment, right? If the junior is exercising a judgment, most of the time he'll exercise the wrong judgment. So if you give something to a junior and you ask junior, exercise your judgment, obviously there is so much risk associated with the judgment of the junior. And the manager has instructed not to use the firm statistical sampling method. So he's breaching the firm policy, and breaching the firm policy is a very important issue here. So again, see, if I'm writing the answer, I'll simply say, manager has breached the firm policy by instructing the junior not to follow the statistical sampling method. I cannot break the firm policy, right? It is a firm policy to follow the statistical sampling method. So the manager has breached the firm policy by instructing the junior not to follow the statistical sampling method, which must have resulted in selecting inappropriate samples for trade receivables, because statistical sampling is better, right? So which must have resulted in selecting inappropriate samples for trade receivables and must had compromised the evidence gathered for receivables. That's one way. The second way is the junior is not a competent person. The junior is not a competent person to exercise judgment or to select a sample based upon his judgment. This must had increased the sampling risk or the risk of selecting a wrong sample over receivable. See, I'm just writing the issue. I'm not worried about is it a quality control issue? Is it a professional issue? I hope when you were reading the retriever group question, you must have found the problem. The problems were very natural. But I think you are more worried about whether the problem is quality, whether the problem is professional. Will that make any difference to your marks? No, Vakas, how many times will you write this? This must have compromised the quality. This must have compromised the quality. This must have compromised the quality. You cannot have you cannot have a generic implication. Your implication has to be very specific. Right? So please be clear with one thing, that whenever you are writing an issue, which is basically a professional issue or a quality control issue, you are more concerned about writing its implication, writing its implication on the audit. So rather than worried about classifying the issue. And that was exactly the concern of most of the attendees. Most of the attendees were concerned about, is it quality? No. Is it professional? I hope you're getting some clarity on this. Should I be wasting time in the exam paper classifying the issue? Or should I be more concerned about, if there is an issue, what must have been the implication of it? Is that clear, attendees? Are you getting some clarification on the concept of classifying, or rather writing the implication? We waste so much time in just thinking about, is it ethical, is it professional, is it professional, is it quality? No, just speak about the implication of the issue. Yes, and specific implications, Vakas, not generic implications. Every issue will have a specific implication. Right? Let me do one wrapping up thing, which would be of much benefit. Suppose the same question for 13 marks, where we had the ethical issues first, and then we start working on the professional and quality control issues. You need to understand one thing. When I speak of the professional / quality control issues, there might be so many things. There might be so many things, or there might be so many issues which can affect the audit process, or which might affect the audit process. For example, this will address some of the questions being raised by the attendees. Give me some examples of this issue, give me some examples of that issue. Let's see if this works for you. This is something not exhaustive, but might make some sense for you. There might be so many issues which can affect the audit process. For example, number one, lack of planning. If there is a lack of planning, obviously the lack of planning means I can come into time pressure, I can come into rush. If I start a audit without planning, I'm compromising my quality. A lack of planning is a very important professional issue. Lack of direction, sorry, lack of supervision. There was no supervision in the audit. I need to know the implication. If there is a lack of supervision, so the junior must have done things wrongly because the junior was not supervised. The junior must have gathered inappropriate evidence, insufficient evidence. Junior working on risky areas. Junior cannot work on risky areas, right? Another example, lack of planning, lack of supervision. The junior working on the risky areas. Professional behavior to comply with laws, to comply with policies. We saw that in this question that the manager was breaking the policies of the firm. So that means he was not demonstrating the professional behavior, professional competence. We saw the positive side of the professional competence in the previous question. One of the partner was a qualified actuary. That was a positive competence. In this question, professional competence, junior versus the manager. Obviously, if the manager do something, there is less risk. If the junior do something, there is more risk. So competence plays a very crucial part, because with competence there is a risk versus competence. So if deferred tax is calculated by a junior, there is a risk that it could have been calculated wrongly, right? If deferred tax is calculated by the junior, there is a risk it could have been calculated wrongly. But if the deferred tax had been calculated by the manager, the risk is mitigated. The risk is mitigated. So professional competence can vary from a junior to a manager to a partner. Professional behavior is to comply with laws. But in a question, if you see someone is not complying with laws, you will criticize the person for that. Professional behaviors, professional competence. No evidence was gathered. Obviously, I'll be critical if a circumstance comes in an exam paper where I have not gathered any evidence. That means my purpose of audit is to gather evidence. Just in the question on retriever, the manager told the junior not to do anything on share capital and director emoluments. So I have not gathered any evidence. That was my objective. So I compromised my objective. I didn't gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Now, again, because this is the practice to pass session where I cannot just focus on the lecture of what is professional and what is quality, but yes, within my presentation, I do cover what is basically quality, what is basically a professional. But irrespective of that, when you are reading a case like such you had in front, you must have identified the problems. I hope everyone must have identified it is a time pressured audit. But you have to write an implication of that. If the junior is reviewing the work of another junior, what is the implication? Rather than being worried about the junior reviewing the work of another junior, is it a quality control issue? No. Is it a professional issue? 1 minute wasted. Is it a quality control issue? Is it a professional issue? Another 1 minute wasted. Rather than the junior review the work of another junior, I should start writing the answer. And I should say, if the junior review the work of another junior, first of all, if there is any issue in the work, it will not be detected because junior is not calibered. So if the junior checks the work of another junior, if there is any mistake in the work, it will not be identified, and ultimately will increase my detection risk. And if there is an important issue within the work of the junior, it the junior will not be picking it. So try to work on the implications, right? Yes, sometimes the implication is within the scenario. You can just think about them naturally, right? Just one example more. It says the manager didn't have time to review everything. Now, half the time I think manager didn't have time to review everything. Quality, professional, professional, quality. Waste your time, waste your time. Rather than I say the manager didn't have time to review everything, that means the manager didn't review my working papers. And if the manager didn't review my working papers, there might be so many blunders in my working paper which must not have been identified. The manager was responsible to check my work. The manager was responsible to check my work. Firstly, the manager delegated the work to the junior because he was not, he didn't have time. He didn't have time, so he asked the junior to do it. That was the first mistake, right? The second mistake was that the manager didn't have time. Now, technically, if the manager is not reviewing the working paper, there might be so many blunder in the working paper which will not be resolved, which will not be addressed. And there is a risk that I give a wrong opinion to the shareholder. So see, I am not worried about the issue class. I am worried about what will happen with the issue. What will happen with the issue? Sumaya, you have to think about the implication around the process of the audit, because if something is happening wrong, either it will affect my evidence, or it will affect my detection risk, or it will affect my report, or it will affect my planning. Because anything which happens wrong in the process of the audit ultimately affects my performance. Now, there are so many things in my performance which can be compromised. I hope I have tried justifying my point, because I'm just coming to the wrapping up. I just have the last few minutes now of the session, and I just want to see your response now. I hope that I tried emphasizing something which I need a response from your side now, that in a question of ethical and professional issue, or ethical, quality control and professional issue, you will look at an issue and think about what must have gone wrong, or what must have been the implication, right? Rather than thinking about, is it quality, is it professional? Will that mitigate your problems? The attendees, those of you who are asking some questions around the same track where I'm trying to address the problem now, are you all comfortable with that? Okay, when you're reading a question, the question, underline the problem, and then see what's the implication of the problem, right? Rather than think about, no, what is the class of the problem? So will the examiner reward me for the class, or will the examiner reward me for the implication? The attendees, I'm asking a question to you. I need your quick response. The examiner will reward me for the implication, or the examiner will reward me for the class of the problem? Obviously the implication, right? The examiner would not reward me for something like this. The examiner would not reward me for something like this. Ethical issue, professional issue, quality control issue. Will the examiner reward me for making this table and telling him what is ethical, what is professional, what is quality control? Is he testing me in the context of an F1 exam, or is he testing me in the context of a P7 exam? If the examiner wants to test the class of the issue, he could have made the paper a multiple choice question, and he wouldn't have given you a time pressure audit. Answer the multiple choice question. Is it a professional issue? Is it a quality control issue? And you tick and you get mark. I hope I've been a bit blunt on it, but the examiner is not putting you into a multiple choice question, right? The junior, the junior calculated the deferred tax. Is it a professional issue? Is it a quality control issue? You tick the right answer and you get the mark. This is not a multiple choice question paper, right? This is a paper where you have to write the implication. This is a paper where you have to write the issue and the implication of the issue. Right? So, for example, the time pressure audit. One student says time pressure audit. He puts that in the column of professional issue. Nahin, another student picks it and put it in the column of the quality control issue. Another student pick it and put it in the column of the professional issue. And again, you put it and put it in the column of the quality control issue. You cannot do that. You're wasting your time in exam paper changing the columns. Rather than just think about a time pressure audit, what is the implication? So it is not a multiple choice question, right? Where you can get rewarded. You can get rewarded by telling the class of the issue. If that is the case, then the P7 exam should have been a multiple choice question asking the student the time pressure audit, is it a quality control issue, true or false? I hope you're getting the sense that the emphasis I'm trying to build up. So table, right? This table has to be deleted from here because again, a lot of students think whatever has been written has to be copied down. So is everyone clear with this? Let's do a final recap. If I go back to the learning for the day 2 today, the first learning we got from the day 2 was that ethical issue when come alone is worth 1 mark. That's where we started the session today. Ethical and professional issues or quality control issues when comes together has 1.5 marks. Each action is worth 1 mark. So the marking scheme was emphasized at the beginning of the session today. No classification of ethical and professional issue. It's just explaining the issue and its implication. That is the most emphasizable part of the lecture or the session today. The point number 4, right? The point number 4 is the key of the session today. This one, the point number 4. I hope within the constraint and the limitations, I tried emphasizing my point to clarity. And the assignments you will do now, please ensure just underline the problem and think about an implication rather than wasting your time on the classification. When writing an ethical threat, justify why it is a threat to score full credit. So you cannot just say it is a self-review threat full stop. No, it is a self-review threat. Why? It is a self-interest threat full stop. No, it is a self-interest threat. Why? So please emphasize on this key learnings from day 2. The word file I emphasized with you on the day 2. I hope I tried bringing some clarity to the subject matter. It was good to see your questions across the session today. And from the questions, I did realize that there are many students, many diversified students who had many illogical thought process about the topic which was discussed today. But I hope I tried mitigating your thought process, or I tried improving your thought process today. And I hope this lecture or session today must have broadened your thought process for your exam papers in June. Right, so I hope you had an effective session today. Please implement the learnings you got from the day 2 today. And I hope your ethical and professional issue as a topic will become more clear as you do the practice of this topic. So I'll meet you tomorrow on the day 3, where the agenda for day 3 is to discuss drafting evidence. Right, so I'll meet you all tomorrow with drafting evidence exercise. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.